Good afternoon, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you with my double hat of IFRS trustees and a professor of economics at London Business School. I'm Lucrezia Reichlin. So to welcome you to the last of our 4 lectures on sustainability standards for disclosure in Africa and the role of the ISSB. So after having looked at the history and the theory of sustainability standard setting, we have now an opportunity to get into the practice and hearing from regulators and companies on the ground about the challenges, but also the opportunities of this journey towards sustainability business in the African market. Ndidi, the floor is yours to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Lucrezia Reichlin, as well, and the London Business School, for collaborating with the International Sustainability Standards Board and the IFRS Foundation, and more importantly, to our panelists on the ground, who are now going to share with us actual experiences following the 3 lectures about what we think is happening and what we think could happen and the potentials of the International Sustainability Standards Board's efforts to create a global baseline. I'd like to ask of my panelists, and I'll go in a sequential order. I'll start with Catherine, who heads ISPAC. I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself as well, but it would be great if you could talk about your sustainability journey and specifically in terms of the ISSB standards, the challenges and the prospects in terms of your intention to adopt these standards so that our audience can understand better where Kenya is at.
Thank you, Dr. Ndidi. And indeed, my name is Catherine Asemeit, Director at ISPAC. And briefly, I'd just like to introduce ISPAC to you, delegate. So ISPAC is the regulator of the accountancy profession in Kenya and was established in 1978 through an act of parliament. So we regulate the accountancy profession, and we pick up, we also participate very closely in terms of syllabus for the accountancy training, and taking up the students from the time when they have done the initial education and continuing in terms of continuous professional development in terms of the international education standards on accountancy. So as ISPAC, what we have done continuously over time is we have adopted, first of all the accountancy standards and audit standards that have been developed globally. And recently, on September 8th, we were able also to announce the adoption of the ISSB standards in Kenya. And we announced our intention, and in that meeting, we had all the key stakeholders involved within the country. So as Kenya, so far as we are concerned, we are now on the roadmap in terms of implementation of the standards. We have done quite a lot in terms of capacity building of the profession, all the way from the preparers, that is the accountants that we regulate, as well as the assurance providers. So this has come in handy. Of course, we have had some challenges in terms of basically, first of all, data management, which we've seen is quite a big challenge in terms of adoption of the new standards. We also have another challenge of comparability of information because of Africa-specific issues that we face. We have issues around governance. Again, those are some of the challenges that we have faced in terms of some bit of bureaucratic nature in terms of what changes need to be adopted by the organizations within Kenya. The other challenge we have faced, of course, is a low level of funding, whereby new initiatives that are being adopted within the country are not easily taken up. And there is that attitude of whatever comes in as new is seen as another additional cost increment. So that has also really affected us. And we've seen that this is going to be a challenge in terms of implementation of the new standards. What we've also seen also is the low level of knowledge in terms of enterprise risk management. We are not as mature in terms of ERM within the country. So our risk maturity level is not as high as the other developed nations. So what we've done, of course, there's a lot of capacity building and there's a lot of hand-holding. But again, that comes in very closely in terms of implementation of these standards, because the issue of stress testing, we are seeing is going to be a bit of a challenge if left, the methodology of that is left to the preparers. So we also have, of course, there's a fear of disclosures where the preparers have a bit of fear in terms of this adopting the standards in terms of what they need to disclose and what not. But generally, from the time of our announcement, we've had quite a big milestones where we've been able to develop roadmaps, we've been able to develop templates in terms of guidance. And by February next year, we're going to publish the guidance in terms of adoption of the new standards in the financial reports. So every year we publish guidance to entities, and we are going to adopt that. I'd briefly just like to talk about the country in general. Our president has been very keen in terms of climate change and sustainability reporting. And the other day, through the climate summit, he announced the intention of the country in terms of the adoption, not only of the standards, but of also different initiatives around climate change. So together, working together with other investors, as ISPAC, we have been able to work closely in terms of ensuring that we attain investor confidence on the work that we are doing and on the work that those we regulate are doing within the country, which in turn helps us is going to help us and has already started creating that good trust between the owners of capital and also any donor funded entities that have been able to have that visibility. So for now, that's what I'd like to say as a highlight, that indeed we are on track, and we have received quite a lot of support from the ISSB in terms of implementation of this. Thank you.
Catherine, you're very kind. You've done a lot of the heavy lifting, and we are really excited about the leadership you've taken, for example, on Africa Climate Week, and specifically in terms of adopting or intending to adopt the ISSB standards. This is a good time to hand over to Dr. Olowo, who heads the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. You were the first to raise your hand at COP27, declaring your intention to adopt the International Sustainability Standards Board's standards S1 and S2. And you also launched the standards in June this year, alongside 6 other global locations, global exchanges. I would really love you to speak about your sustainability journey so far, and specifically the prospects that you see and the challenges regarding the ISSB standards adoption.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ndidi. I would answer this from 2 perspectives, as a regulator and also as a policymaker. The FRC, the Financial Reporting Council in Nigeria, is the apex regulatory body for corporate reporting, financial reporting, and corporate governance as a whole, caring for private and public institutions. As you are well aware, the sustainability journey in Nigeria has gained a lot of traction. So we see buy-in from an elite group of stakeholders, an array of stakeholders, from private, as well as government. And as you've rightly said, we participated fully in the process, even leading to the establishment of the International Sustainability Standards Board. And we took active part in the development of the 4 sets of standards, the IFRS 1, S1 and S2, which we immediately launched June this year. We've seen an increased level of interest and readiness from stakeholders groups. So that's really encouraged us. We set up an adoption readiness group comprising of assurance providers, preparers, sectoral regulators, investors, and professional accounting organizations, including the academia. Like you well said, we announced, our election to early adopt these standards at COP27, and it's been moving on very, very well. We're gaining a lot of support from the private sectors, especially. Amongst the challenges, that I'm going to talk about, I'll summarize it in 2 folds. I think the first one is we'll continue to talk about capacity. Capacity remains a challenge. There's need for us to upscale professional capacity, of different professionals across the corporate reporting realm. Because as you are all aware, sustainability reporting requires new knowledge. We're talking about carbon emission. We're talking about, all these things that were not, it had taught in school. So there's need for us to do a lot of thought leadership, a lot of advocacy in these areas to ensure that everyone, especially professionals, gets it right. The second thing is on the issue of infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I mean technology. Most of the sustainability metrics that are being measured today are generated through technology. We're talking about carbon emission, we're talking about energy, water, and all those kind of things. So there is a real need for technology and infrastructure to be embedded, across the region. And with the position that Nigeria has within the sub-region, we're championing advocacy, across government and private, organizations to ensure that there is more and more investment in infrastructure and technology, so that at the end of the day, we're not just doing sustainability reporting, but we are embedding ourselves in sustainability practices. So those are the two, challenges. And my colleague, in Kenya, has, mentioned a lot of points that we both share in common. But to summarize everything, our sustainability journey is going very well, and we just hope that, in the coming years, we'll be able to get everyone in, both big, small, and medium enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabiu. Also, what you've muted at is the collaboration that's actually happening across different jurisdictions on the African continent. And this is a good time to call on Desmond, who represents DTIC from South Africa. On the one hand, we had a regulatory roundtable last week where we convened 7 African countries to really share where they are on this sustainability journey. So Desmond, in some cases, you're way ahead. In some cases, you're making your way. We would love to hear a little bit more about the South African journey on it in terms of ISSB adoption specifically, or intention to adopt, and sustainability in general.
Okay. In fact, my name is Desmond Ramabulana. I'm in the policy division in the DTIC company law policy. I've been working on company law policy since 2008. That was during the implementation of the new Companies Act of 2008. So the new Companies Act of 2008 was a reform which at least put in a reporting framework into the South African Companies Act, because normally South Africa before didn't have a reporting framework, but when the 2008 Companies Act, at least there was an establishment of the FRS, which is the Financial Reporting Standard Council, which has power to issue standards through the minister and through the regular due process. When it comes to standards, we do have an Financial Reporting Standard Council that has been established in terms of the new Companies Act. And normally that Financial Reporting Standard Council is comprised of auditors, preparers of financial statements, accountants, and lawyers, especially in the reporting fraternity. So our journey through reporting standards is that when it comes to sustainability reporting, the only thing that we only had as South Africa was that when the act was promulgated, we came with a social and ethics committee framework, in which that social and ethics committee framework was more on sustainability. It was more on sustainability issues. It was more on the UN principles of global impact. It was more on other issues that were not climate related, that referred to labor issues, anti-corruption, and other issues. So when the ISSB was formed, when we got into this ISSB bandwagon, we found that at least we do have a little bit of a challenge in that we still need to adjust our regulatory framework. We have got a Financial Reporting Standard Council, which doesn't have enough expertise. In fact, their mandate is more on financial reporting. and not non-financial reporting, as sustainability standards are more non-financial, even though the entire Companies Act encouraged a lot of integrated reporting. But we didn't have a financial reporting standard council that we had capacitated enough in order to do non-financial reporting. So what we are just doing, we just need to do in order to strengthen that network is to increase the capacity of the Financial Reporting Standards Council, or maybe forming another body that has got powers to report on sustainability. But anyhow, we as South Africa are very much committed to sustainability, climate change, and everything that relates to sustainability. But it's just that now there is still a task that is awaiting ahead, so that at least now we filter and reference the sustainability into our Companies Act. I think that is what I can say for the opening at the moment.
Desmond, thank you so much. I think it's so important because also Nigeria went through the process of amending with its legislature the mandate that the FRCN had to incorporate sustainability reporting alongside financial reporting. I have a lot of respect for South Africa for indicating, especially because there are others listening, that this is a journey. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes shorter, and Nigeria, like South Africa, can actually start with voluntary reporting, which is why it's so interesting that we have 2,000 South African companies on board, both of whom are considering voluntary reporting, one in Nigeria, one in South Africa. And the policymakers, with a lot of respect, I'm sorry that I'm taking so much time to say this, but I have so much respect for the regulators because they are carrying preparers, other regulators along to ensure that we keep the cost and burden of reporting low and to align with the ISSB's objectives of providing decision-useful information to investors to unlock capital flows. And that's a perfect time to hand the floor over to you, Tinu, who sits on the NGX RegCo. You were the host of the launch of one of the 7 standards globally, just like the JSE in South Africa also was. I think it's notable that of the 7 locations where the standards were launched, 2 of them were African. Now that is significant. So I'm very keen to hear, since the ISSB standards were written for investors and for global capital markets, your position, Tinu, from the NGX.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ndidi. As Ndidi said, my name is Tinuade. I'm the CEO of NGX Regulation, which is responsible for regulating NGX's market. And NGX operates a market that basically has a number of instruments, largely equities, fixed income, ETFs, and so forth. Our journey actually started in October 2013 in our iteration as the Nigerian Stock Exchange, when we joined the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative. And that was because at that time we read the tea leaves and we realized that we ourselves, in order to be an exchange that was at the forefront of ESG sustainability issues, needed some support from a group of exchanges that were all focused on these issues. And we've been through it since 2013, including having the first Nigerian Capital Market Sustainability Conference, where we basically we're talking about figure out what types of standards will be appropriate for the capital markets in Nigeria. And so in looking at the ISSB, we watched the ISSB keenly because of the statements that were being made regarding the ISSB, particularly from IOSCO, because we're a member of IOSCO. And we felt that if IOSCO was interested in these the organization and interested in the standards, and there were over 130 jurisdictions that belong to IOSCO, this was something that we needed to keep an eye on. So it's no surprise, Ndidi, that the ISSB and the FRC found a ready collaborator with the launch in June or earlier this year. Now, what have we been doing before then? Before then, we had sustainability standards by which we wanted our companies to comply around 4 pillars and 9 principles. And what we expect is that once the FRC, in its leadership role, as Dr. Olowo has said, with respect to sustainability reporting in Nigeria, sets the national standard, we will either go by the national standard, or if we need to revisit our sustainability disclosure guidelines under those national standards, specifically for the companies listed on NGX, we will do so. What are some of the challenges? I think the greatest challenge is there's a common thread that has come through. Awareness is number one, just people being aware that this is an important thing and that this is not going away. I was at an event earlier today, and while people at that event were all people that understand ESG and sustainability issues, one of the things that was raised is this whole, argument around, is Africa ready for this? Is this something that we should be worried about in Africa? So there's the awareness, and I think there's the stakeholder engagement that is necessary to bring people on board as to why these issues are important. I think once you have the awareness, there's also a huge capacity gap. We have a number of companies that are right on point and, can, in their understanding of sustainability, can rank among the best in the world. But we also have a lot of companies that need that capacity and need that capacity building. And it's at a time when the entire world is starting with the ISSB standards. And so one of the things that we're concerned about is, will we have the attention that we need when the entire world is competing for the same resources that understand these issues and that can present them well? And then, of course, another challenge is the macro story in Nigeria. So even if you do what you need to do as a company to get your sustainability story correct, and that includes everything from your risk analysis to your strategy to your matrices and targets, down to downstream actually having the report, will you be attractive because of the macro story in Nigeria, which at the present time is not what I want to use. We just have some ways to go on our macro story. Let me put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tinu, also for speaking to the macro story. And so even though I'm tempted to ask Tobe this question first, I'm going to ask Johan the question first, because the truth is that there are 2 challenges for African preparers. One of them is the macro story, where there is perceived risk of country-level risk, which provides a ceiling to your credit risk rating. And then secondly, there is the question of inadequate disclosures, so that the rating agency, where they don't have your data, essentially mark you at the worst level possible. So those are 2 big issues that we need to resolve. So let me start with the largest capital market on the African continent. Johan, over to you. What is your perspective as a preparer on, one, the ISSB standards and the challenges trying to achieve in terms of providing material information to improve sustainability disclosures to investors, and what has been your sustainability journey so far?
Thank you so much, Ndidi, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you're calling from. So my name is Johan Thyse. I'm the Vice President, Sustainability and Reporting at Sasol in South Africa. And thank you for inviting me and allowing me to share my views. Now, I think Sasol has been a member of the United Nations Global Compact since 2001, and we've used their policies and approaches to inform our path to becoming more sustainable. So for this reason, the 10 principles, which has already been mentioned here today, together with the SDGs, informed and continues to inform our approach to sustainability. Now, from a sustainability reporting perspective, we've been doing it for the last 33 years in one way or the other. And as a company, we have indicated very clearly that we are committed to the Paris Agreement. So we've set initial climate targets in 2019. We've updated those in 2021. And some of those include reducing our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 30% by 2030. And we've set an ambition to be net zero by 2050. We are looking and set a target for the inclusion of 1,200 megawatts of renewable energy into our operations by 2030 as well. And we've prioritized 5 SDGs, SDG 8, 9, 12, 13, and 17, as we believe that these are the ones we can most constructively contribute to. We've also set ourselves the aspiration to improve our ESG ratings on a year-on-year basis, with the ultimate aim to be included in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Now, ESG ratings, and Ndidi, you've just referred to it, is directly related to transparent disclosure. And this is a good segue to just talk about the ISSB standards. So the standards will mostly impact our integrated reporting, our sustainability reporting, and our climate change reporting. One of the major challenges is, of course, the ability of any company, which has already been mentioned here, to implement something new. And I think this is where the standard has this built-in proportionality that recognizes that some companies cannot move at the same pace as others, which is actually quite good. So the fact that you don't have the same capacity, skills, and resources actually allows you to sort of run at your own pace, if you want to call it that. So in my view, this supports this whole approach that I like to learn as we do. Not only does it help in how you prepare your reports, but it's also cost effective. And I think what's more important, it allows companies to get into place over a period of time, the right people, processes, and systems. So turning to my view on the adoption of the standards, not just for Sasol, but for other organizations as well, it's encouraging to know that the standards is positioned as the global baseline, and they're, in my view, very much the glue that will potentially hold all the standards together. So what is important here is that it has at its base TCFD. It's aligned with CSRD and ECRS, except for materiality, of course. Interoperability between GRI and ISSB is becoming a real reality. And as a company such as ourselves, that has been applying TCFD since a year after its inception, and with Sasol's global presence, it could contribute to standardization, reporting optimization, and efficiency, of course. So at Sasol, we are now on the path to consider the adoption of the standards as a foundation platform. I therefore have no doubt that there will be a positive uptake in Africa for the standards as it gains familiarity and more standardization. Thank you. I hope that helps us opening remarks.
Johan, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. And also what I just hear disclosure, what your remarks have prompted in the side chat is that we are going to take this further and explore essentially working with the exchanges and the regulators to identify exactly why is it that there is inadequate data, or that the data that is available results in lower ratings for African entities. And, you know, I'm going to open the floor to you now, Toby. And I know that, you know, you've looked at different rating agencies, for example. So sometimes the ones that are offshore provide you with a lower rating and you're struggling to communicate effectively. And the ones that are onshore actually perhaps have a better understanding of the risks and opportunities in the African landscape. So I'm very curious to hear from you about your own sustainability journey. You span 2 countries of 2 of the regulators at the table, in fact 3, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa. So you're talking to all your regulators around the table over here. And what's really important is not just embracing this sustainability journey, but what I also know you're doing is you're reaching out to your supply chain, because it's not just about the large listed entities. It's really about ensuring that the proportionality measures that have been built into the ISSB standards S1 and S2 are translated so that we ensure that we're carrying smaller entities and even the informal sector on the African continent along. So I'm very curious to hear about your sustainability journey, and bear in mind that the pressure is on because you're closing off this round before we start the next round.
Okay, thank you very much, Ndidi. Like Ndidi said, my name is Okigbo. I'm Chief Corporate Services Officer for MTN Nigeria. For us, first, let me state that where you have challenges with external ratings is like Tinu stated earlier, it's about the country rating impacting the local business. That's essentially it. Because, for example, an MTN Nigeria, as Tinu will say, my regulator will tell you, is triple rated A. So that's as high as you can get within the country. And I think this shows also in the numbers within the country, but the country macro tends to impact things. With regards to our sustainability journey, I think listening to Sasol, I'll just start our journey from when we put down Ambition 2025. When we did Ambition 2025, the first thing we did was to put a stake in the ground and to say, this is what we want to achieve within this particular period. Net zero by the year 2040. From an inclusion point of view, we took a decision that we will have 50% of our workforce being women by the year 2030. And today we are 36%. And for EXCO, within our EXCO is already 50%. Within my division, and that is the Corporate Services and Sustainability Division, we're actually above 50%. I have 6 people that report into me. Only one of them is a guy, the rest are women. So I feel most of the time it's like a lion in a den of Daniels, but that's to show that there is deliberate action being taken. So the first thing was we put a stake in the sand and agreed to what we are going to do when we say ESG at the core. Now, aside from these things, we knew, for example, one of the challenges we will face will be finance. So when this role came up and I was asked to lead the role, the first thing I did was to bring the Chief Finance Officer on board. That was the first stakeholder that I went to and spoke to, and I said, listen, for us to get this done, we need to be deliberate. It's going to cost us money. And my brother, you need to be my partner. So the first step, I brought him on board. The second thing we needed to do was the tone at the top needed to be right. So the board constituted a board committee headed by a Leonard Silk. For those who are not Nigerian, this is the equivalent of a Queen's Council in the UK. And this committee, which is the Social Ethics and Sustainability Committee, provides overarching governance for the sustainability and for the ESG team. Everything has to go through them. They provide guidance and they give us the governance and the certainty we need in everything we do. Then the third thing we did was to clearly set up a department focused, because it's not just about reporting at the end of the day. I think it was Dr. Olowo that mentioned it. It's about embedding these ESG practices into the business. And Ndidi, when we met in South Africa on the sidelines of our global leadership program, this was what I stated. Having all the reports in the world and not really embedding and living this sustainability, to me, at the end of the day, doesn't really help anybody. So there was a need to embed it. So we have now a department headed by a general manager called Sustainability and Shared Value. Why do we say shared value? We're not just looking from a sustainability point of view at what MTN does in Nigeria. And please, let me state this. Most of us in MTN, because of the work we do, because we connect people, because we enable people, actually look at the work we do like a vocation. We think we're doing that, but we believe we should go a notch further. And shared value is to look at, ultimately, if you look at the value chain, everywhere we impact, whether it is with the regulator or with regards to paying our taxes to government, all of those things, whichever place on the value chain that anybody is operating, how are we impacting? And doing this, the benefits have come. Listen, everybody has spoken about the challenges. Let me not dwell on that. I think the prospects, the benefits have been clear, at least to MTN. When you talk blue chip companies within Nigeria, I think you can rarely go higher than MTN Nigeria. And two regulators are here. With regards today to MTN Nigeria, with respect, and this is because of everything we're doing around this sustainability, we are probably, without a doubt, let me not say probably, the highest rated company on the stock exchange. And with regards to tax compliance, we've been voted as one of the best in the country. From a CSR perspective, we are award-winning. And all this is because even though the macros might be speaking against the country, within the country, because we follow these standards, we are making sure that if somebody has to take a decision despite the macros to say, which is the company I trust, who do I go to? MTN will be the person that person will ultimately go to. And that is the prospects in this. And that is why it is necessary that companies should commit and do something about it. I'll stop here until the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toby, for your passion. And thank you also for sharing that it's not just about unlocking capital externally, it's also about internally breaking down the silos within the organization and building bridges between sustainability and financial reporting. And of course, we already know that the ISSB standards require entities to disclose their sustainability and climate-related disclosures at the same time as financial statements, so that there's decision useful information for investors. And so this really informs my next question. And I'm going to combine two thoughts at the moment. So first of all, regarding the ISSB's efforts to create a common language for sustainability-related and climate-related disclosures that provide decision-useful information in a cost-effective manner to investors, how do you see the prospects and challenges in terms of our ability to unlock capital flows? Because if we are asking entities to provide better information, to better assess their value creation and their risks and opportunities in order to unlock capital flows, is there a direct connection? Because right now we only have 3% of global climate finance flowing into Africa. As Johan said, and Johan, I'm going to start with you, only 2% of global assets under global asset under management are on the African continent. So how do you see, on the one hand, the opportunity that the ISSB offers, and on the other hand, the challenges ahead? Over to you.
I'm going to say, Ndidi, they call me the eternal optimist. So, you know, the first prize is always that we can have one standard that we deal with, right? That we have to focus on. If that is too big a bigger take or a bigger question to ask, I think the second one is to have as much alignment as possible between these standards. And I think this is the opportunity that, number one, the standards, the ISSB standards are starting to play. So as a company such as Sasol, I mean, we're not unique. The fact that we are currently being overwhelmed by this avalanche of data standards, and one can only think of one such as the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, and the envisaged rules of the US Securities and Exchange Commission, and that's only mentioning a few. So some might argue this is voluntary, but if you don't conform, then it impacts your ESG ratings. So, and that is where something that you need to deal with. So I think when you're faced with so many standards that's requiring data, you find yourselves reining in some of this data. And when you have reigning data, you want to make sure that you have a plumbing system that can collect it and direct it to the right place, so that it can be made sense of. And I think this is the mandate and the role that the ISSB can play in further developing standardization of standards when it comes to other areas other than just climate change. So simplify and create this global language that will, number one, relieve the reporting burden, but also put in place a basic plumbing system, if you want to call it that. Just coming back to your question on the 2% of investment that's or management impact assets that's under management globally. I mean, as you said, Sub-Sahara only account for 2%. And in my view, this is where ISSB can contribute to significantly increasing this percentage through its baseline approach. Why am I saying so? I'm saying so because it's a single global language which everybody understands. Investors will understand it. There is comparability. There is transparency. There's standardization. And when that happens, when there's more transparency, it reduces risk. And risk, where there's less risk, it builds credibility. So if you are able to do that, this provides investors line of sight, what is to be achieved, how, by when, and over time to also independently measure the progress and or the achievement of those targets. Because I think it's important that you must provide that level of assurance so that not just your word need to be taken, but that investors can also check that for you. So this, for me, is where it results better information to be able to make better decision-making, which will result in more investments. And I think I'm going to keep it short and keep it there. I hope that helps, Ndidi.
Yeah, and that's really profound, actually. And it makes me want to respond to you by calling on Desmond. So we're dancing this dance across many African jurisdictions between mandatory and voluntary adoption. And obviously what's very important, and I'm looking at the other regulators in the room as well, is tone at the top. So what policy says, and that this then cascades downwards. And I think what's also very important for policymakers is to be sure that from an African perspective, we're not just talking about the large listed entities, but we're also talking about smaller entities and the base of the pyramid, even the informal sector. And what's very important as well is that we ensure that we are mapping a pathway that does not mandate too early, but actually makes sure that we're carrying the private sector along in terms of determining the pathway to adoption so that it enhances private sector investment, boosts economic growth, and attracts investor capital. Desmond, I know this is a heavy question for you, but then on the other hand, you kind of have hold the pen in terms of amending or recommending what policies need to be made in order to really benefit all. So it'd be very beneficial to hear from you in this regard, regarding where South Africa is on its journey towards that and how you see this impacting larger entities, smaller entities, entities at the base of the pyramid.
Okay. Yeah, just that I don't know whether I heard your question well, but and as far as I know is that in South Africa in general, there is a commitment towards climate and sustainability standards. Like we heard from Sasol and other, there are other companies now still, even JSE listed companies that are still reporting, that are reporting on sustainability, even though it is not yet it is not yet been referenced in the Companies Act, but sustainability companies in general in South Africa are committed to this reporting. So, and as far as I know, is that if sustainability reporting is encouraged, then there is going to be a lot of sustainability for companies in that most companies will be able to access finance, and that there will be a lot of there will be investor as well as capital inflows that are going to be unlocked through investment. So that is what I can say at the moment. So when it comes to general reporting, we are just going, there can be big companies because sometimes there is what we call, there are what we call thresholds. Maybe big companies, for big companies, it is not a problem when it comes to reporting. But smaller companies, we can just encourage them to report but without coming with a regulatory burden, but encouraging them to come along so that at least when they join the bandwagon, at least they will be able to report. So that is, I don't know whether I've tried to answer nearly all the questions or whether I'm relevant to the question.
You've done a brilliant job, Desmond. Thank you very much. And it gives me the opportunity to speak to Dr. Olowo, Dr. Rabiu Olowo, regarding the Adoption Readiness Working Group. As I understand it, it's designed to actually carry along the range of internal stakeholders, including regulators, assurers, auditors, and preparers as well, to make sure that the regulator doesn't run ahead of the market and encouraging voluntary adoption ahead of time. Now, how are you going to build that bridge, and what is your intention in that regard, if you can describe it, and how do you build the bridge towards unlocking capital flows?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ndidi. I think for us, at this stage of implementation or at this stage of the journey, it's not really about compliance, it's about advocacy, it's about holding hands, ensuring that everyone understands the value of the sustainability practices, And in the medium to the long term, we believe that everyone is going to fall in line. So that's the sense of the group that's been set up to help both private and public organizations, small, big, and medium. I think one thing that is clear in terms of the value that this brings is that investment thrives on data. And that's the sense we're trying to bring to business. And data here means corporate disclosures. Are you interacting with the society, the herd, and everything? People want to know, especially as, investors had requiring greater transparency, disclosure, and accountability from business. Hence, a single set of high-quality global sustainability, reporting principles or standards will enhance comparability. We improve, understanding of those businesses by investors, regardless of where they're coming from. You recall that before the establishment of the ISSB, we have a plethora of sustainability reporting frameworks ranging from, quite a number of them. So we believe that this ISSB, standards will bring a global baseline so that everyone can understand and be on the same pedestal, throughout this journey. And, on the issue of investment, you mentioned a very important, statistics the other time. Only 3% of the Global Climate Finance Fund finds its way to Africa. And that's not just a question, that's a pressing issue for Africa, is to ask ourselves, how do we create that enabling conditions to unlock investment this way? And so that's something that we must put at the back of our mind, as we drive the sustainability journey to unlock capital to this region.
So whereas it would be logical for me to go to Catherine at this point, I cannot but extend that question to you, Tinu. You sit on the capital markets. Part of what we're trying to achieve is really deepening capital markets and ensuring that we're unlocking capital, but not just global investment capital, but also local investment capital. And one of the big concerns that we hear sometimes is the fear of delisting due to required additional disclosures. And what the ISSB is trying to address is to reduce the alphabet soup of disclosures, namely 600 voluntary standards, to bring it together to one common language that is interoperable, but also proportional, and that people can use across the world as a global baseline in tandem with financial statement disclosures to unlock capital. To what extent is the ISSB actually addressing those requirements specifically for the African continent?
Okay, thank you, Ndidi. I think that the ISSB is good. I think the standards are great. First of all, they come from the IFRS Foundation. So there's that base in that you're not trying to describe something that people don't understand. People are familiar with IFRS, the accounting language in Nigeria. And so like at the event I was at today, I was saying, this is IFRS, the sustainability language, and people get it. Now, I think that for the particular problem that you're talking about, which is listed companies feeling put upon because, for every new regulation, especially regulations about transparency and disclosure, they're an obvious target. I think the conversation cannot start from the point of reporting. The conversation has to start from the point of risk and what is in it for the company. Why do you need to do this from a sustainability and being around for a long time from an economic perspective? And then you add the E and the S and the G as one package for the company. If you start from reporting, you are putting the burden first. And so, of course, the natural instinct is we don't want any more reporting. We have enough reporting. We're in the eye of everybody, and every regulator wants to try their hands on us. If you don't want that reaction, you need to go upstream. And upstream is what are the risks? What is your strategy? How are you going to get funding to fund that strategy over a long period of time? And then you show them the money. You've got to show the money in terms of, as Johan was saying, how much fund, what is the value of funds that wants to see this type of reporting? And what is the value of funds that wants to see that you have, as Toby was saying, sustainability in your DNA. Sustainability is not just something that is hot and new to you. It's actually part of the way that you do business. And so for us, that awareness is absolutely important. That stakeholder engagement is absolutely important. The standards are great. And I think that they help us in terms of the alphabet soup. They also, and so it's going to be cheaper, I think, ultimately for folks to report, especially when you get all the endorsements that you get and you have all the interoperability. I think fantastic news about, the initial rapport coming between GRI, which is used by several of the listed companies on the continent, and ISSB, starting with the Innovation Hub in Singapore, and the general body language of both organizations, showing that they're interested in the users, the preparers, and what is good for the preparers. But it has to go further upstream. And I think the ISSB, to be successful on the African continent, using the Nigerian example, has to also go upstream in terms of capacity building, a lot of the awareness as well, if it wants to get to that result with the report, with the standards. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tinu, for your usual very, very powerful words. I was tempted to call on Toby next because I didn't want him to be last again. I was trying to break the pattern. But sorry, Toby, you're going to have to close this session out because I've just received a question from the chat from Tanzania, Samuel. He speaks about the importance of the African Union coming up with a guideline to implement and enforce the implementation and imperatives of the climate reporting standard, because his concern is how will the entire Africa be helped from this devastating climate change? And we know that of the 10 countries most impacted by climate globally, 7 of them are African. And also the reason why I'm calling on you next, Catherine, is because Africa Climate Week was held in Kenya, in Nairobi. Your president spoke very strongly, not just during Africa Climate Week, but also during the Macron conference in Paris in June. And a lot of that was really around unlocking capital flows, same thing as the African Development Bank keeps speaking about. So really, from the center of attention where you are, and you've been very proactive in terms of embracing these standards and embracing them, not just in terms of the Central Bank of Kenya's interest, the CMA's interest, ISPAC's interest. You've been very collaborative. In fact, last week or this week, I was at the African Securities Exchange Association meeting. You held your 40th anniversary. So you're very, very engaged on the ISSB standards. Now, how do we move from theory to reality? How do we make sure that the adoption of these standards actually unlocks the capital that is so needed on the continent?
Thank you, Dr. Ndidi. So indeed, as Africa, as Kenya, and basically, I would also like to shed some light as to what we have done from the time when we announced our intention to adopt the ISSB standards. Is that first we believe the ISSB standards they have a direct impact and a direct inclination towards unlocking capital flows. So first is the issue of debarring any inefficiency that already is there or potentially would arise. This is mainly through the issue of data management. There are issues that I have spoken about on governance. I had also mentioned about innovation, and all this would ensure that we achieve comparability, and we also achieve the congruence, and we are able to report transparently. So if entities do this, then together with what the other panelists have mentioned, then this is going to indeed help to unlock capital flows, because the investors are going to have decision-useful information to help in making the decisions that are required at any particular point in time. So in Kenya, really, we have been privileged to host the recent climate summit. We've also been quite privileged to have many different organizations that are dealing with the devastating impacts of climate change. And our president, like you have mentioned, Ndidi, is very keen in terms of signing agreements to ensure that he participates in Africa-specific initiatives where the climate change initiatives are discussed, and also funding and unlocking any necessary funding that would come in to help us to mitigate the effects of climate change within the country. So Tanzania, being our neighbor, I think has also been enjoined on this. And your president from Tanzania, from the delegate who has asked the question, your president also participated heavily in the Climate Summit Week, and as well as many other forums that our president has also participated on. So what we believe is that all these are going to help in terms of managing the devastating effects of climate change. But from unlocking the capital flows, again, is just to mention that our intention in adoption of the standard is to ensure that over and above giving guidance in terms of financial reporting and the general accounting and audit standards, we want to make this to give that guidance to the preparers, so that there is that discipline that comes with it, and managing a lot of inefficiency that would have otherwise arisen. So I think that basically points to the fact that there's a lot of direct congruence. Thank you, Dr. Ndidi.
Thank you so much, Catherine. For full disclosure, it's now 7 o'clock. Typically, we would have ended this session right now. In Nigerian language, there's something that we call jara. So everything that you receive from this moment on is jara. It's an extra bonus, because I'm going to call on Tobe. I'm going to give him a slightly tricky question. And then if you're happy to stay on for a few more moments, we can actually tackle a few of the Q&A. But the sequence going to be now for the next 10 minutes is I'm going to hand the floor to Tobe, and then I'm going to call on Suresh to really wrap us up. And then we will decide whether we'll take a few of the Q&As from the session. So Tobe, over to you. I mean, one of the things that really made an impact, and I'm actually now grateful that you're the last person to speak, because in my last life, I was a telecommunications regulator, and I'm very proud of the work that you've done, Tobe, because I know you from that life. And I know that at that time, the thinking was that telecommunications would never be able to reach the base of the pyramid. We would never be able to impact or create capital and unlock capital, for example, the way M-Pesa has done in South Africa, in Kenya, and that has spread across the continent. And so you really are not just a key actor in terms of taking leadership. You are the one as MTN who declared, alongside the launch of the standards on NGX, that you would be voluntarily adopting the ISSB standards. And you declared that not with the CEO or any board member or any management staff. You had your chairperson of the board indicate your commitment to this regard. And in spite of the fact that it wasn't clear what the direction of travel was, that's a lot of bravery. It's a lot of potential impact, not just on you, on the capital markets, not just on your supply chain, but also at the base of the pyramid. Now, what makes you so confident that ISSB can help you in terms of cost-effective, decision-useful information that unlocks capital flows and evaluates effectively the risks and opportunities that accompany sustainability and climate in particular to help you build a more resilient business and a more resilient economy?
Okay, so I'll answer this by looking at the word, the simple word that we've been bandying, we've been using so freely, and that word is sustainability. What does it mean? If you distill it to its very essence, sustainability simply says that you will be here tomorrow. And for you to be here tomorrow, and that's what I mean when I talk about embedding it. For you to be here tomorrow, you have to carry out your business practices in such a way that it's not just about how much profit you make. And the truth is, if you do business sustainably, you will actually make quite significant profit. But it is that everybody, I've stated this before, everybody who is your stakeholder will rise with you. So that's the concept that we call shared value. Now, for us, it's commonsensical. It's easy to take this step because we could see that, and this is particularly important if you're working in a VUCA environment like we are here in Africa, like dare say Nigeria. If you show your stakeholders that you truly believe that you're doing good work, if you show your stakeholders that you truly believe that you can all rise together, I think your stakeholders will bet on you. Now, I talk to my people, my colleagues, and I say that the most important real estate in the world, and I'm speaking from a consumer point of view, not from an investor point of view now, but ultimately it impacts investors. The most important real estate in the world is a piece of the consumer's mind. If you can get that real estate, then you can get benefit from the consumer throughout the consumer's life cycle. And that is what ISSB seeks to do. Because when people look at it simply, and I think somebody mentioned it, from a reporting point of view, I think it was Tinuade that said it, then you're putting the cart before the horse. The reporting is good. It is important. Because investors, whether it be people who want to invest in your shares, people who want to give you loans, all that, they need to have information with which to act. But it's also about your impact on society. It's also about how, at the end of the day, those investors, the report you produce is backed by your actual actions in such a way that you're not simply, you're telling the truth. You're not lying. It's as simplistic as that. So for MTN, having taken that step, having taken that decision, it's almost an existential issue. If we're going to stay and remain here, then these standards are critical for us to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. That's our belief. It's not just, like everybody has said, there are challenges. Data is difficult, doing scenario analysis, based all sorts of challenges. But it's looking at the main prize. What do you want to achieve? You want to sustainably do business. You want to do business and remain. You want people to trust you. You want 100 years from today, MTN will still be available. And that's what every businessman wants. And that's, for me, is commonsensical. And that's why we put our stake on the ground on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tobe. And thank you so much to the room. I noticed that no one has dropped off. Really appreciate it because we're over time. Suresh, without further ado, over to you.
Good, thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Just a bit of background, I'm a trustee of the IFRS Foundation, but I'm also the lead independent director of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So I'll chat to you about that in two contexts. Firstly, at a broader level, just talking as a trustee of the IFRS Foundation, I suppose, and looking at that from an Africa perspective, sustainable growth is a major need for Africa's development. And there are huge opportunities for investors across Africa in terms of the natural resources that we have, in terms of biodiversity, as well as human capital. The world also relies a lot on resources coming from Africa. And when you are working with trading, whether it's as an investor or just as trading across continents. I think that the requirement now is for greater disclosure and transparency around sustainability issues. And I think Johan mentioned that very succinctly previously. Now, when we're talking about sustainability, I suppose climate change, and the world is talking about climate change. And whilst that's also very important in Africa, there's greater pressures that exist on the social front, for example, like poverty, unemployment, decent work, diversity, etc. And these are all major issues across Africa. But whilst these are challenges that we have to face, there's also huge opportunities to investors and to various people in the supply chain in this regard. Just two examples that Africa has got the youngest workforce in the world, and we are the lowest emission of carbon since the year 1800 at 4% compared to the rest of the world, where it's sitting in the mid-20s. So I suppose there's a huge amount that is there, and the standards that we have to now sell our, if I can say, we got to tell our story across Africa to the world, and these standards that have been developed by ISSB, have been supported by the G7, have been supported by the G20, and also endorsed by IOSCO as suitable for capital markets. And the last time IOSCO did this was about 20 years ago, when the standards, the financial reporting standards, were endorsed by them as suitable for capital markets, and that has led to the adoption of the financial reporting standards by over 140 jurisdictions. So our ambition and our aspiration as trustees of the foundation, as well as supporting the ISSB, is to get to that level of adoption in terms of the ISSB standards. In that regard, an adoption guide is being prepared, and it's being issued shortly to jurisdictions to consider the individual journeys and pathways to adoption. Capacity, I've heard that word a couple of times. I mean, there's a lot of capacity. We've signed up arrangements with 30 organizations across the globe, including in Africa. I think it's Pan-African Federation of Accountants is one of them across the African continent that is going to assist us in capacity building in that regard. So I think it's very, very important that Africa starts putting itself on the stage in terms of the sustainability journey. Just talking about, just in a short bit about the JSE, and Desmond has alluded to this, that some of these points have been in our Companies Act, but I think and so if we look at the top 40 companies on the JSE, they do present themselves pretty well in terms of that framework, but we're all aware of the multiplicity of frameworks that are there, and the impact that has on the cost of capital. So I think we, coming in through the ISSB standards, I think is really, really helpful in that regard to reduce the cost of capital to common frameworks that can be used, and to which jurisdictional and additional stakeholder requirements could be added. So in that regard, the JSE, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, we issued some guidance. It's a voluntary guidance, but it was very, very well received, and it incorporates the standards of ISSB S1 and S2, and we've started building a lot of capacity around that. There's a lot of learning and education that's taking place through the JSE. They are providing courses in that regard. And one of the key things that the JSE has done, and we do talk about, and I've heard this comment a number of times this evening about the cost. And so we've done a cost analysis, and through an independent researcher to kind of identify what is the cost at different levels of organization or different sizes of organizations, and we shared that across the our issuers. So I think it's very important. On the market-facing side, we've developed the market in terms of investors in this space. We've issued a number of social bonds, a number of companies that have come on to issue social bonds dealing with things like hospitals, medical facilities, waste management, etc. So I think this poses, S1 and S2 poses a tremendous opportunity for us to kind of to say, as somebody mentioned earlier, what is the strategy? What do you have as your challenges? What are your opportunities? What are the risks around it? Communicate that, and then talk to the world about through clear communication, through metrics, and whatever other information you need to give to kind of get the capital in. We've heard about how low the level of capital investment across Africa is. This is one opportunity that we can really use to showcase Africa to the world. So thank you very much, Ndidi, and for a wonderful session.
Thank you so much, Suresh, for bringing everything together as powerfully as you have, and speaking not just for the IFRS Foundation, but also for the JSE and in your personal capacity, and bringing all of your wealth of experience to bear. We are 13 minutes, actually 13 is my lucky number, so that's great. After when we should have ended, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to our very powerful speakers and to our audience that has remained on the 150 mark since inception. Thank you very much, Tinu, for representing the perspective of the exchange. Thank you, Catherine and Dr. Rabiu, for bringing in the perspective of the regulators and the work that you do. Thank you, Desmond, for bringing in that view of the policymakers, and Johan and Tobe for charging ahead and really leading the way, because it's in the corporate entities where we will see the impact and where we will receive the most valuable feedback. Thank you for your courage and for standing. Thank you, Suresh, and also Lucrezia. Lucrezia, I see that you put your camera on and then you put it off again, because it was you that reached out to all of us to ask us to convene this and to put this spotlight on the African continent. And most especially, thank you, Lucrezia, for taking the initiative for not just leaving these 4 series of webinars, as it were, not just the theory, but it was your idea for me to reach out to different actors who are in the field. And I'm so grateful that every one of you who I reached out to immediately said, yes, I'll do it. So this is really of service to the continent, but generally also it's a very important voice. And I'm very pleased that we will leave this forum and we will follow through on one of the key questions that was raised, namely, how do we make sure that we close out the data gaps to ensure that the risk ratings of entities, particularly on the African continent, are more fair and actually also allow these standards and these disclosures to unlock capital flows. Very pleased to be joined here by Richard Barker, my colleague on the ISSB, who is a big, strong Africa advocate and has done a number of things with me on the Africa front. And I will close by asking you, Richard, if you'd like to say a word, and then essentially giving the floor right back to you, Lucrezia, because this is your baby and we've just supported you to bring it to life. And I just want to also acknowledge Tiago and Ollie and Nicola, who are behind the scenes and with whom we wouldn't have been able to pull this out. Richard, over to you, and then
yeah, just very briefly, some heartfelt thank yous, Lucrezia, for initiating all this in the first place, indeed for being one of the co-parents of ISSB in the first place, right? So an incredibly important figure in making ISSB even possible, and then to Ndidi for picking this up with such enthusiasm. Everyone on the call should know that Ndidi is a force of nature at the ISSB and a very powerful voice, a relentlessly powerful voice for Africa and for the global South. And this has been, I think, an appropriate sort of venue for her to be able to share that with everybody. So thank you, and to Tiago and team at the Reichlin Institute for doing such a fantastic job. Thank you. Lucrezia.
Yeah, just a last word to say that, well, I thank you, everybody. I think this was clearly a success, and this is, I think, is the kind of things we have to do. So I think what was, key in this initiative was the collaboration between the ISSB, the IFRS, and an educational institution like London Business School. I think education has to be part of this journey. There were lots of questions in the QAs about education, about learning, about this stuff. And the London Business School and the Reichlin Institute is committed to help. And of course, the IFRS is also very much interested in forming liaison with the universities around the world. And knowing that education cannot be just in an ivory tower. We need this relationship with the regulators and with the companies, and this is what we try to achieve with this initiative. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.